and welcome back to what is certainly going to be the final Kentucky Derby profile here on Racing Rundown this week. And the only reason that I know that it's going to be the final Kentucky Derby profile is because we don't have any more also eligibles. And also, this is the last one that's going to chronologically go up on YouTube, so that also helps. But this is Cyclone Mischief, the initial also eligible, who drew in yesterday afternoon with the scratch of Practical Move. And then from there, obviously, there were 3 more scratches, which drew in the other 3 also eligibles. Now we find ourselves with a 19-horse Kentucky Derby. That being mentioned, let's get to Cyclone Mischief, trained by Dale Romans, and he will now be ridden by Corey Lanerie. Joel Rosario was named as the also eligible rider, but obviously with Disarm still in the Kentucky Derby, and Steve Asmussen, the trainer of Disarm, Joel Rosario will stay aboard Disarm, so Corey Lanerie picks up the mount, and Corey Lanerie will ride in another Kentucky Derby. Now, this one is going to be a very surface-level preview, and I'm going to apologize for that in advance, because I don't have a lot of nice things to say about Cyclone Mischief. Dale Romans is a personal friend of mine, so I'm happy for him that he gets the opportunity to have another horse in the Kentucky Derby this year, but Cyclone Mischief was a horse who took advantage of the new point system this year. He 8 points on the Kentucky Derby trail, and as a result of his thirds in the Fountain of Youth and the Florida Derby, he got the 45 points necessary to be the first horse out, and then as a result of the chaos that broke out over the course of the last 24 hours, Cyclone Mischief was able to draw into the Kentucky Derby. So 2 lifetime wins in 7 starts. He broke his maiden at second asking at Keeneland on October 19th. He has actually 2 runs over the surface at Churchill Downs. He ran in his first career race there when he started in a maiden race on September 16th, and then he ran in the Kentucky Jockey Club on November 22nd, was unplaced in that race. But from there, ran a really good race in an allowance at Gulfstream, won by just under 6 lengths in that race, and he finished in front of Litigate, who won the Sam Davis. So, and then Mr. Ripple, who also ran an okay race in the Florida Derby. But that's really all that's really been positive for Cyclone Mischief. He ran in the 3 prep races on the Kentucky Derby Trail at Gulfstream Park. 7th in the Holy Bull, was didn't really have a good race there. I am certain that something was off with him, whatever, it wasn't his day, because he ran much better in the subsequent 2 races. Cyclone Mischief isn't a bad racehorse, but he just is certainly one that's a cut below a Kentucky Derby win contender. But we'll finish up, tried to make all in the Fountain of Youth, went as far as he could, was eventually outfinished by Forte and Rocket Can, who I would project are better horses than him. Kind of the same thing in the Florida Derby, with the kind of the same thing, at least in terms of being outfinished by 2 better horses in Forte and Mage, but he didn't make the lead in the Florida Derby. Now, I don't really think that had anything to do with how he placed there. He almost looked like he was going to run second when it was kind of him and Mage back and forth with each other between the top of the stretch and the 8th pole, but then he eventually dropped back and finished a convincing 3rd in there. But Dale Romans has said that Cyclone Mischief is going to the front, and Cyclone Mischief, at the very least, makes the pace scenario a little bit more interesting. We only had 2 committed speed horses, and then several horses that we might have projected would be close in the race, but Cyclone Mischief now adds a 3rd, as Dale Romans says that he will be going to the front. In terms of speed figures, again, very average. He's kind of around the same level as Raise Cane was, and the only reason I say that is because I'm recording this immediately after the Raise Cane profile that I recorded. But 91 last time out, and that gets to the first pro. He did run a career best buyer last time out, and he has been on a steady improvement as of late, with the exception of the Holy Bull, which, again, I draw a line through that race. But 90 in the allowance at Gulfstream, 89 in the Fountain of Youth, 91 in the Florida Derby. So he's getting better, at least on a buyer standpoint. And he does have back-to-back stakes placings, which isn't something that you can knock him for. And then the 5-length victory in the allowance. But I mentioned that the pros are very surface level because there's not a lot of positive things to say about Cyclone Mischief. After that, he was beaten easily in his last 2 races, as I said. Tried to make all in the Fountain of Youth. Wasn't able to get that far. Forte eventually ran past him, and Rocket Can was a length and a quarter clear of him for second. I'm going to skip over the second pro just for a moment and just mention that the third one, and I should say not pro con, is he's not going to get to save any ground. Now, he's not buried out in 20 with the scratches, but he's going to be, I'm not sure how they're going to do it. The Churchill Downs hasn't said whether or not they're going to run 1-19 or 2-20 with the single horse starting gate. I would imagine that they'll run 2-20 with an open inside post. But that means, if they do it that way, that means Cyclone Mischief is in 17. Now, obviously, he's saddled with that 17, has never won the Kentucky Derby thing, but he's also not going to get to save any ground, which isn't going to do him any favors when you have all the other potential speed horses inside of him. Now, I don't think they're going to all send, and I think that it'll be under the wire the first time. It'll be him with Reincarnate and his commonality owner mate, Jace's Road. They will be the 3, but he'll still be 3 wide going into the first turn, which isn't anything that's going to help him, and that gets into the second con that I ordered, and that's this trip seems too far for him. Obviously into Mischief, the can't get a mile and a quarter thing has been put to bed, but this is a horse who probably seems like he does his best running at 1 turn. His best career effort came in that 1 turn mile, the allowance at Gulfstream on January 8th was a 1 turn mile, and he ran in the Fountain of Youth and the Florida Derby like a horse that was getting tired toward the end of the races, and with 2 committed speed presences inside of him, and then potentially others, I don't really see a way that Cyclone Mischief is going to be able to make every yard and win the Kentucky Derby. He'd have to take a massive step up, and he'd also have to extremely trip out. Well, a lot of chaos would have to happen for Cyclone Mischief to win the Kentucky Derby. Again, I don't really see any scenario in which he does, but maybe 3 speed horses all stumble, don't make the lead, and Cyclone Mischief finds himself in front and is able to set a 23 3/4. That would be the only way that I could even conceive of him winning the Kentucky Derby, but even then I think it is exceedingly unlikely. So with that being mentioned, that's it for the final Kentucky Derby profile here on Racing Rundown. Be sure to check out our updated picks video and also the Kentucky Derby content that we have produced throughout the week. We will see you after the Derby for our Kentucky Derby recap, maybe recorded on Sunday, if not early next week. We will see you then. Have a good one.